You're listening to theoutdoorstation.co.uk.
Hello and welcome back to The Outdoor Station and another edition of the Book Club with your host, Andy Howell.
A couple of months ago on the Book Club, I talked to Paddy Dillon about walking and hiking in Ireland. As the weather cools here, Paddy likes to head south, to hike and trek amongst the mountains, islands and coastlines of the Mediterranean, an area about which he's written a series of well-received guidebooks. Perhaps none of the treks featured in these guides is more famous than the legendary GR20 that cuts across the high, rugged mountains of the island of Corsica. I'm delighted that for this podcast, Paddy has joined me to talk about the trail. I started by asking him just how difficult this was. After all, the GR20 has a reputation of being the hardest, most difficult waymarked trail in Europe.
I think that's a very, very fair comment. I've walked all sorts of waymarked trails and I've never found one as tough as that one. I mean, you can make up any route in the mountains and make it as tough or as near impossible as you want, but for an actual waymarked trail, which is billed as being for walkers, I don't think it comes tougher than the GR20.
Now, just try and give us some perspective on that. I mean, if you were a UK walker, perhaps comfortable walking in the lakes or Snowdonia, the GR20 wouldn't be beyond our reach easily, would it?
No, not really, because if you look at some of our classic scrambles, such as Striding Edge in the Lake District or Sharp Edge, or say in Wales, the Snowdon Horseshoe with the ridge over Cribgoch, it's about that sort of level of difficulty. The only thing is it tends to sort of go on for much, much longer. In no way is it as bad as say the Cooling Ridge on Skye. It's not like that at all. It's not a rock climb. You don't need ropes. It's a walk, but you do need to get your hands out of your pockets. You do need to be prepared to grapple with the rock. So if that sort of puts it in perspective for British listeners, then that's where I'd pitch it. You know, I'd say it's like our classic Lake District and Welsh scrambles, but nothing like the seriousness of, say, the Cooling Ridge.
Now, everybody that I've spoken to who's completed the GR20 comes back absolutely raving about it. I mean, it may be a challenging walk, but it's a fabulous walk, I guess.
It is. The scenery is absolutely stupendous. It's out of this world. It's not the sort of place you, as a normal, ordinary walker, would imagine being. And yet, you know, great sort of effort has been made to steer a route through the most remote and rocky terrain in a way that is just about manageable for an ordinary walker. So once you get there, you really do feel as if you are very much in the mountains. You actually feel you're a mountaineer, not a walker. And when you grab hold of the rock, it's good, safe, solid rock, but you really do feel as if you're sort of scaling mountains, you know, like somebody would if they were, say, going out and climbing Everest or something. So it's not surprising people come back and rave about it, because it's the sort of place that just inspires you.
Now, give us an idea of how long it would take to complete the walk reasonably safely without pushing it too much.
Yeah, I'd recommend 15 days. Now, you'll always get somebody who, when they hear 15 days, they think, well, I wonder if I can squeeze it into a 2-week trip. But then, of course, you've got your flight out there and your travel home afterwards, and that whittles into those 2 weeks. And before you know it, you're tripping over your own sort of feet, trying to double up on stages. 15 days is just about comfortable. If you try and do it in 14 or 13, you really do very quickly start to feel the effort, because you're having to do an awful lot to complete a day's walk. And although the route is only 118 miles, you know, and a lot of people would say, well, I could do that in a week, it really isn't, you know, that sort of terrain that you can rush at it. You've got to give it the time. And even with a 15-day schedule, if somebody is normally inclined to, say, take a day off every 3 or 4 days, they've got to build that in as an extra. So what I would say to people is, you know, allow 2.5 to 3 weeks, and then you're covered for your outward travelling and your return. You've got plenty of time to do the walk and still take 1 or 2 days off in the middle of it all. But apart from that, you know, it's not a very long walk, but you do feel as if you're going to be there for an awful long time. And certainly the work is cut out for you in terms of ascent and descent. You're talking about maybe 40,000 feet of ascent and descent of 118 miles. And in 15 days, the fact it takes so long should give an indication of just how rugged that terrain is. I think in an extreme example, there's one day where you only walk 5 miles, but you really do have to give it an absolute minimum of 6.5 hours. So that's less than a mile an hour, which is a snail's pace. But the thing is, it's comfortable at that pace. If you tried to do it at 4 miles an hour, you'd probably just trip over a rock and dash your brains out. It just can't be rushed, and it shouldn't be rushed. It should be enjoyed at a nice leisurely pace.
Now, those people that haven't done much European mountain walking before, I mean, this really is important advice, isn't it? Because you... the rhythm of the day tends to be to get started reasonably early, and you climb right up to the highest point and usually then back down to a refuge or a village or a gîte. But you really don't want to push it too far, do you? Because that really catches up on you after 2 or 3 days.
It does indeed. I've met people who've doubled up on stages. They've done a day's walk and then they've added another day's walk to it because they thought, well, 5 miles and 6 miles is 11 miles. I can walk 20 in a day, so 11 is no problem. And they end up finishing very late in the evening. And they end up in the woods of one man, tripping over things that aren't really there. You get so tired that you start to become maybe careless, just because of the fatigue. So when they chop it up into these small stages, because of the steepness and ruggedness of the terrain and the fact that quite often you've actually got to stop and look at the rock before you make your next move, all that takes time. And, when you're actually out there, you've got to give it that time to be able to get through safely. But doing it safely means you can enjoy it. If you're taking your time over something, quite likely you're going to spend lots of time looking at the scenery as well. So it's going to become an immensely enjoyable exercise. I think the record stands at 35 hours for somebody who literally ran it. And of course, you've got to run in the dark as well. But this is a guy born and reared on the island and, done any number of recces along that route and is, well and able and fit for it. The Foreign Legion take about 9 days over it. So ordinary mortals should give it that extra time. They should give it the full 15 days and be prepared to, literally get in there safely, slowly and enjoy it. When you do sort of finish a day's walk, quite often you're only finishing at a refuge where the option is to lie down on a foam mattress on a bunk or camp outside. But all the food is up there, your water is there. You don't actually need to carry anything with you apart from, your usual 1 day's worth of walking gear plus a lightweight tent or sleeping bag just in case the refuge is full, and a wad of money. And all you need to do then is just turn up at the refuge, sign up for a meal, buy your own supplies, whatever, and then decide whether you're staying in the refuge or outside. And you very quickly fall into that routine of just, starting, taking the day nice and steady, finishing, relaxing with a meal and a drink, and then off to bed, and same again the next day. And it's a case of getting into a leisurely routine as quickly as you can, rather than trying to attack the terrain or force it to a successful conclusion, because a place like Corsica will not be forced, it will not be conquered. It sort of dictates its own terms, if you like, to mere humble walkers.
Yes, it's important to realise that you're on holiday, and for those people that haven't sampled European refuges, particularly the French ones, I mean, there's that wonderful moment at the end of a day's walk, isn't there, as you creep in the late afternoon, early evening, when there's usually a cool beer awaiting you, which is a rather civilised way of doing wilderness walking, funny kind of way.
Yeah, the only thing about the Corsican refuges are that they're a lot simpler than the ones you would find in the French Alps. The ones in the French Alps, the beer will be cold. In Corsica, the beer is quite likely warm because of the heat of the day. They tend to be very, very simple and fairly small. It's unusual to find a refuge that would hold even 40 people. And one or two of them, you're talking about, they only hold 12 or 15 people. Now, that's a problem when it's peak holiday time, bang in the middle of August there, when the entire world turns up to walk the GR20. There's no way, you might as well just assume there's no way you're going to get a bunk in the refuge if it only holds 12 or 15 people and there are 200 people heading towards it. Don't get into a race over it. Just accept that you're camping outside and everything will be absolutely fine. But if you really do feel that you're going to do this without a tent and you're going to turn up at the refuge, you've got to get into a completely different routine of actually starting well before sunrise and racing to the next refuge and getting there at some ridiculous early hour in the morning just to get your name on a bed. I wouldn't advise anyone to do that. I just say pack yourself a lightweight tent and sleeping bag. Just assume that there's nowhere to stay at the refuge and you are going to be camping outside. And if there is a bed in the refuge, that's a bonus. And at the end of the day, every little bonus counts, you know. But the food and the drink is up there already, at least for the 4.5 months which constitute the actual walking season. The refuges are staffed. They cook you a hot meal if you want it, or you can just buy their own supplies and cook your own meal, or just eat cold food, whatever you want. But the thing is, you don't have to carry big, heavy weights, and that does make a difference in that sort of terrain.
Okay, so you've raised a number of things that I think we need to tease out for people listening there. First of all, the book is very, very comprehensive in terms of giving details of refuges and also alternatives. I mean, there are many parts, many routes in the book where you can drop down to a village and a different type of gîte or a different type of hostel. But you really do need to carry a tent with you, particularly during peak times. I think that's your recommendation, isn't it? Yeah,
what I'm saying to people is that there is a very, very busy period, which basically goes from mid-July to mid-August. And even just outside of that period, it can still be quite busy. And certainly at weekends when local people go up into the hills, the pressure is definitely on those refuges in terms of internal space. Always plenty of room outside. You can always squeeze a tent in somewhere, no matter how rough or rocky or at a slope it is. But when the refuge is full, it's full, and that's the end of the story. So what I would say is a tent and sleeping bag are very, very good insurance against all eventualities. So if you pack them, you've got them, and you're not worried about, you know, whether the refuge is full or empty or whatever. It just doesn't interest you. You know that at the end of the day, you're okay because you've got a tent and a sleeping bag. So I'd always say to people, don't rely 100% on a bed at the refuge. You can't book them in advance. You can't phone them up. It's first come, first served. And at the busy times of year and at weekends, just assume that you will not be the one who gets there in time to get the last bed. Assume that you'll be the one camping outside. And if you budget for that, if you actually build that into your sort of mentality for the walk, then you won't be disappointed. You know, your space will be there. You'll pitch your tent and you'll be fine. But if you really are hanging on getting a bed in a refuge and there isn't a bed, what do you do then when it's the middle of nowhere? The refuge is full, you've no tent, and then it starts raining. You really are stuck. You know, it might be 2 days' walk to the nearest road. So what I'd say is it's good insurance. But then, of course, if you're going to carry a tent and sleeping bag, you want something very, very lightweight. Generally, the weather's good there for camping. It's really good for camping. It never gets too cold in the night time. It's never too wet. If it rains, it usually all comes in a huge, great downpour, and then it's dry. So, you know, a lightweight tent will do it. A lightweight sleeping bag will do it. And these days, a tent and sleeping bag together is not going to add more than 2 kilos to your pack. And for those 2 kilos, you've got peace of mind for the entire trip.
Yeah, no, I think we should be clear here that this is not quite like somewhere like the Pyrenees where wild camping everywhere is a possibility. Here we're really talking about camping grounds around refuges, aren't we? But every refuge does have its camping ground, doesn't it?
Every single refuge has spaces nearby for camping, and basically they're just places where boulders have been squashed to one side, or there's a little patch of grass here and there. And again, it's first come, first served. If you're the first person there, you'll get the flat grassy bit. If you come much, much later in the evening, you'll find that you're the one trying to wedge your tent in between two enormous boulders and having to put up with a sagging ridge because there just isn't the space to pull the guy ropes out or even drive the pegs into the hard rocky ground. So the other thing I would suggest is some sort of mattress to lie on, if it's a thermarest of some sort or a roll mat, a close foam mat, something just to take the hardness out of that ground is an absolute bonus. But the thing about the national park there, which covers virtually the entire route, is that there is no wild camping permitted in the national park. So you must camp alongside the refuges. And the prices are very, very cheap. I mean, you're not going to pay more than €5 to camp, and that gives you the use of the gas stove outside as well. And if you stay in the refuge, I think the going rate is just under €10. And if you want them to cook you a hot meal, again, you'll get a 3-course meal for under €10. So you're not going to break the bank. But then again, everything, all services that revolve around the refuge are very, very basic services. If you get anything luxurious, it is an absolute bonus. But most services are very, very basic, which is why I've built in so many alternatives, taking people down to villages, because if they want to go and stay in a hotel or a gîte and have access to a proper hot shower and a bit of privacy for themselves, all that's available for the sake of moving 3 or 4 hours off route. And it brings a whole new dimension to your trip if you've actually been down and stayed in a proper Corsican village and met Corsican people. If you're up in the mountains on the GR20, you'll meet the entire world walking up there, but you won't actually get deeply into Corsican culture. The route basically starts in a village, finishes in a village, and has one very small village in the middle. Apart from that, it's just pure mountains and refuges. So I do encourage people to take these little options to move off route and actually sample some real Corsican culture, meet some real Corsican people while they're there.
Okay, no, those people that like wild camping might be a bit disappointed about that, but if you haven't sampled the high refuges, I mean, they are in themselves, aren't they, a real experience. I mean, you're meeting people from all over the world, and when people talk about the camaraderie of the mountains, they're not being too cheesy, are they? It really is a fantastic experience.
Yeah, I think you'll find that because the GR20 is so popular and because everybody is going the same way, and basically if you walk it from north to south, you are going to be walking with the bulk of the people on a daily basis, and you're going to see a lot of those people day after day after day because they're going to be walking at something close to your pace. Some of them are. Some of them will be faster, some will be slower, but all of them will end up at the end of each day at the same refuge. So the people you start with, assuming that there's not going to be a huge dropout rate, a considerable number of the people you start walking with are still going to be there at the end. The only time you tend to lose people really is when somebody takes a day off and you don't. So you carry on with fewer people than you started off with. If you take a day off, if you take 2 or 3 days off, you might find all the people you were walking with are way ahead and you'll never see them again. So you end up with another crowd of people then. But I think it's almost impossible that you could walk that route entirely on your own. I've tried it coming from south to north, so of course at that point everybody comes at you in a big rush in the middle of the day, and most of the rest of the time you're on your own. But about 5% of people walk it south to north, so you're still going to find people going your way. But it is an amazing trail, and because it's so dedicatedly up in the mountains, and because it's such rugged terrain, everybody's on the same track. There are very few people peeling off to do other things. They're all going from one place to another, and you do very, very quickly. You find friends you never knew you had up there, and it's a wonderful experience altogether. And they really are. If you start counting the nationalities in a decent summer, you won't be out for 3 or 4 days before you've counted 12 nationalities.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the real attractions of walking in these mountain trails, I think. Now, so we should look forward to quite a few nights in or around refuges. But as you said earlier, and something that's highlighted very much in the book is, yeah, from time to time drop down. And you talk about these bergeries, don't you, that exist. lower down in the mountains and the villages themselves, and you're going to get a completely different flavour of life there, I guess.
Yeah, completely. I mean, the bergeries, some of them have started doing basic accommodation. A bergerie is basically a seasonal mountain farm. So in the past, people would have kept all their animals down in the lower fields, if you like, and then in the height of summer, driven their cattle, pigs and sheep up into the mountains, and they just graze their way over the mountain passes and graze their way through these high plains that you get in certain areas. And at the first sign of winter, everybody would back out. But of course, if you could be up there for maybe 3 or 4 months grazing your animals, you need a little shelter to live in. So they built lots and lots of little summer farms, and they only use them for 4 months in the year, and then the rest of the time they're down in the lower pastures. But they have very quickly cottoned on to the fact that there are these tired, hungry walkers coming past all the time. And of course, it was an easy thing in the first instance. If they were, say, milking cows or sheep and making cheeses, it was an easy thing to just sell those cheeses on to the walkers. It certainly saved carrying them down for the winter. And then they got into supplying cured meats. And then some of them said, well, we're up in the mountains making cured pork and we're making cheeses. Why don't we actually bring things up that people want as well? So some of them do that now. They bring up great mule trains full of bars of chocolate and bottles of ale and all this sort of thing. So it really does get to be quite sort of civilized. You turn up at a very simple looking bergerie and they've got gas canisters on sale and a choice of fine wines and any number of bars of chocolate and cans of food. And some of them do they have a few bunks inside, and I suppose they have the nerve to call themselves a gîte d'étape, but basically they're as much as simple as a refuge. And but the thing is, it's another service, it's another level of service for the route. And I think there's nothing better than actually meeting local people at work in the mountains who are willing to share their food, drink and accommodation with you. I think that's a wonderful thing and to be encouraged.
Now, you mentioned cured meats there. You are likely, aren't you, to come across pigs that are free range and foraging far and wide. And I think Corsican pigs have got something of a reputation, haven't they? Yeah,
I think a lot of people overhype the pig situation. I mean, yes, they take the pigs up into the mountains, they turn them loose, and of course in the winter the pig isn't going to stay up there anyway. It's actually going to come looking for a way down. So the idea is they drive them all back down again. But in the meantime, they're up there and they're churning up the ground and looking for grubs or whatever. And they have a whale of a time. They're the most happy-looking pigs I've ever seen. But you do get people who are not used to coming across free-range pigs, then start tossing them bits of sandwiches, and before you know it, the pig then comes to demand being fed by every passing wayfarer, and some of them get a bit stroppy if they don't get fed. Now, I've never seen anyone bitten or trampled by a pig, but I have seen people running away in absolute horror because the pig won't go away. But what happens in a lot of places is if you're near a bergerie, the guy running the bergerie will pick up a handful of rocks and will literally stone the pig until it gives up. But, the thing is, if you don't encourage the pig won't take any notice of you whatsoever. If you encourage it, it'll just keep coming back for more. So I think people have to get into the frame of mind. Don't feed the pigs, let the pigs do their own thing in their own time. Don't feed them, don't encourage them, and they won't come mooching around the campsite or go running off with the food that you've carried all the way over the mountains. But the thing is, it's just an animal like any other, and it will react like any other. If you encourage a dog, it will follow you. If you feed a cat, it will hang around. If you don't, they'll go away. And that's all it is. But some people come back and they talk about wild pigs and, having themselves eaten out of campsite and home. And it's not that bad. I think there's a lot of hype there.
No, I think it was Chris Townsend, wasn't it, a couple of years ago, who reckoned a pig made off with one of his sandals during the middle of the night.
Yeah, if you leave something out and something finds it, consider it gone. Either keep it in the tent with you, keep your food in a big pack inside your sleeping bag, nobody's going to get it then. If you leave anything outside, chances are something will come along in the night and thieve it. If it's not a pig, it'll be a fox. They're very, very elusive. But the thing is, the foxes do go wandering around the refuges in the evening, and they do cause an immense amount of damage. If you leave a bag full of food outside, they'll tear that bag open to see what's in there, and you hear a great clattering and rustling of plastic, and the next thing you know, somebody's yelling because something's made off with their food. I think the foxes probably cause more damage than the pigs do, but you never see the fox. The fox only comes round basically when it's too dark to see anyway.
So apart from pigs and foxes, I mean, could you describe the rest of the wildlife, the flora and the fauna to us? I mean, what does the scenery look like? Is it alpine scenery or...?
Yeah, it's very, very much alpine scenery. Even in the height of summer, you'll find little streaks of snow up in the mountains. I've been there even in exceedingly hot weather in August, and there's still been patches of snow in the mountains. And at the very point that that snow melts, it's winter and it starts again. So it does hang on, does the snow. You know, if you go there in June, July, you'll expect to be walking on snow at some point. If you're there at August, you'll expect to see the last bits of snow. So the thing is, very steep mountains with little patches of snow on it looks very, very alpine. The main sort of forest cover there, which you'll get in the valleys and quite a considerable way up the mountain, are the Corsican pines or Loriccio pines, and they are the true mountain pine there, and they're absolutely lovely to see them, tall and straight, apparently just sprouting out of bare granite. It's amazing the way they can get their roots into the tiniest cracks. And then there's the general mountain scrub, which will either be something like sweet alder or spiny broom, which is something you learn very quickly not to sit on or even try and attempt to walk on. It would just scratch the ankles off you. You wouldn't even throw your rucksack down on it for fear you'd rip a hole in your rucksack. So you keep away from the scrub. And then you look out for the tiny, tiny little flowers. Now, a lot of people who visit Corsica, they tell you about the mackey and how flowery it is and how aromatic it is. Well, that's fine, but the mackey is a long, long way down the mountainside. Up on the high mountains, it's just a thorny scrub with tiny little mountain flowers in there. If you go and look at the very edge of a patch of snow when it's melting, you'll expect to find a sort of a fringe of crocuses. The moment the snow is off the ground, the crocuses pop up. And the moment the snow has receded another 6 inches, those very same crocuses die, and another lot pop up. So it's quite amazing to find out how quickly things like, you know, simple little flowers will literally pop out of the ground the moment they've got the sun and the light, because for most of the year they're buried under snow. And that's the thing about Corsica in winter. It is truly alpine, and there's no way anyone could walk the GR20 when it's covered in snow and ice. I think the only person who attempted it, they still haven't found his body, and that was back in 2003. So it's very, very serious terrain in the winter. But in the summertime, the most amazing, colourful, often very arid and very hot. That's the one thing where it stands out from the Alps. You tend to get very, very strong sunshine, extreme heat conditions, and that will, because it's an island sitting in the middle of the Mediterranean, cause massive updrafts of damper air from the sea, and then you'll get these whopping great thunderstorms that maybe brew up in an evening or maybe just pass altogether. But you very quickly get into the routine of just being amazed by the scenery, astounded by the sort of the small-scale wildlife, if you like. It's not so much the big things you meet along the way, but the small little things like tiny flowers just popping out of apparently bare granite. They really are. They're amazing. And, you know, they're taking Corsica as a whole, it just becomes part of that experience, just a wonderful place to be and a wonderful place to observe.
Okay, so we've got stunning scenery. We've got a fantastic welcome at the refuges and the bergeries and the villages. So you painted a fantastic picture there, but I'm going to have to come back and ask you about these chains. Because there is one section, chain, isn't there? Yeah, there is the one section that we're all sitting there thinking, now, what does he mean by chains? So come on, take us through that.
There's a little place called the Cirque de la Solitude, and it is only a tiny place when you look at it on a map. It's not really a cirque even, it's just a rocky ravine scoured down the side of a mountain. And I gather they had to make, 6 or 7 passes when they were trying to waymark the GR20 to actually find a way through the Cirque de la Solitude. And eventually they found a way through, and they went through with a paintbrush and they put all these stripes of paint to show you the way. So the thing is, if your hand or your foot is near the paint stripe, you're okay, you're on course. No matter how severe the terrain looks, and it gets very steep, there's a lot of bare rock in there. And when it's not bare rock, it's great massive heaps of boulders. Now obviously, when people are scrambling up and down heaps of boulders, the biggest problem is, not dislodging a boulder onto the person below you and hoping that the person above you doesn't do that either. And that, I think, is a bigger safety concern than being on bare rock, where the rock is not going anywhere, and so long as you keep hold of it, you'll stay there. But because it is very steep rock, and because there are a lot of people who literally get the shakes when they're in an exposed situation, the authorities went through and they put a series of chains in. Now, a lot of people talk about the Cirque de la Solitude being festooned with chains, as if you're going to be tripping over them and knocking them out of the way all the way through. In fact, I counted them, and there were only 3. There were 2 chains on the way in and 1 chain on the way out, and in between them is a metal ladder with 8 rungs on it. So again, when you get people say, "Oh, there's ladders," I say, no, there's 1 ladder and it's got 8 rungs on it. It's not the end of the world. It's just a very short ladder that prevents one overhang becoming an almost impossible obstacle for a normal walker. Because if you've got your heavy pack on and you're not used to climbing rocks, and you find there's an overhang that you'd actually have to reach above your head, grab hold of it and hold yourself up, most people would say, no, thank you. So they've put this little ladder in, it's got 8 rungs on it, so for the sake of going up 8 steps, you've overcome this monstrous great overhang. And that's the end of it. After that, there's another chain, you're on your way out. So 3 chains, 1 very short ladder, and that's all the aids that are in there. Now, the first time I went in through the Cirque de la Solitude, I did it with my heart in my throat because, again, it's one of those things, I believe it's overhyped. So I went in there in absolute panic and terror, along with everyone else I was walking with, and we all dropped into the thing, and within 5 minutes we were getting quite blasé about the whole thing, because we realised you don't need to hang on to the chain. The chain is there if you want to hang on to it, but most of the time you just scramble through. 1 hand, 1 foot, move your way through, and if you get a little bit of a shake on, grab the chain, because that's going to hold you. But you don't need to hold on to the chains the whole way through. You certainly don't need to clip into them. They're not like via ferrata or anything like that. And then there's the 1 little ladder, up the chain on the other side. When you pop out on the far side, you're just on an enormous, great rocky scree, and then down to the refuge. The funny thing is, that's when most accidents happen, because everybody believes that's it. The Cirque de la Solitude is behind me. They get into a jaunty stride, and the next thing they trip over their own bootlaces and hit their head on a rock. So you tend to find accidents don't happen in the place you expect them to. They happen either side when people have relaxed a little bit too much. It's always rocky terrain, so you've always got to watch your feet. But the thing is, the aids have been put in there if you need them. So the first time I went through, I was absolutely terrified. The second time I went through, I actually found it quite, interesting and entertaining. It was quite good fun. And then the third time I went through, I thought to myself, I will make a deliberate effort not to touch a single chain, but just to go through either with my hands, my feet, or walking poles. And I managed it. The only piece of metal I touched was the 8-rung ladder. And the chains, I found out, when it comes to the crunch, you don't actually need them at all. So at the end of the day, it's not so much a walk, it's more a scramble at that point, but it's still by no means a rock climb, no way at all. And the only place where you would have to climb a rock is put the little ladder in. So that makes it, it's just like going up a step ladder at home, no more difficult than that. But then again, I would never belittle the place. It is a place where you cannot afford to trip over your own bootlaces. You've got to watch where you put in your hands and feet, and you've got to look out for those little paint marks, because they keep you on course. And then at the end of the day, once you realise all that, you can actually settle back and enjoy the La Solitude, because it is an amazing place. It's one of the true highlights of the journey, that one.
Okay, well, thanks for that. That's very reassuring. It sounds to me as if as long as you're used to using your hands a little bit in the Snowdonia or the lakes, you'll be fine. Now, you mentioned that the time of the year to go a few times, and in August it's obviously going to be very hot. So when does the season open, Paddy, and when does it finish?
Yeah, most people recommend not starting before June. Now, I've been in there at the end of May and only just been able to get through some of the snowbound parts. Now, people who start in June are still going to find gullies full of snow. Almost any north-facing gully, especially on the northern half of the route, is going to have snow in it. But the thing is, once the sun hits the snow, it softens up. And usually it's in the middle of the day when you come across these snow patches. So they've softened up. You don't need an ice axe and crampons usually. It's a case of your feet or your boots just crunch into the snow and it's got good grip. But you will expect, if you start in June, to find snow in the gullies and maybe snow going across the tops of some of the ridges. In July, that probably will all have gone. There might be a little bit in one or two gullies. That'll be it. In August, you should be able to get through without actually stepping on any snow. And in September, it should be completely snow-free. But by the middle of October, you could find the first few snow flurries of winter coming through. So your effective season is June, July, August, September, and the first half of October. And that 4.5 months is the time when the refuges actually have a guardian and are supplied with food and drink. If you go outside of those periods, you're going to be walking in snow at some point. You're going to have worse weather. You're going to be in with the winter weather. And if you go at the end of May or the latter part of October, the refuges won't have guardians. The bergeries will all be vacated. There'll be no food supplies up there. You could have to walk 9 or 10 days maybe without actually being able to buy food. So at that point, you've got to carry it all. So obviously, outside of the season, it's a completely different trip altogether. It's one where you're going to have to carry a lot. You're going to have to be a lot more self-sufficient. Money is not going to buy you food because there's no food there to buy. So that's something to bear in mind. But then when you get this 4.5 month season, the middle part of it, mid-June to mid-August, is the absolute peak period, and you cannot guarantee being able to get any indoor accommodation. So I would say you must take a sleeping bag and a tent. If you go very early or very late in that open season, you should be able to get into the refuges, no problem. But if you don't one night, then literally you're out there bivvying among the boulders. There's no other way about it. So, it's a case of just approaching it with all the information you need, and then you know what to expect. And that's why I always try and give people all the information they need so that they can make the ultimate decision on the day.
Good. Now, I guess, you've already told us that most people do this in a kind of north to southerly direction. But I mean, in terms of access, it's getting easier and easier to fly to Corsica now, isn't it? And straightforward to catch the ferry as well. So presumably, it's not too difficult to get to the start at Calanzana.
No, if you try and get as close to Calanzana as you can, you're either going to come on a flight to the airport at Calvi, or you're going to come on a ferry to Calvi. And I think there are 2 buses a day, most days of the week, that actually link Calvi and Calanzana. But the thing is, they go at awkward times. It's really to suit local people. So most people, when they get to the airport or the ferry port, they grab a taxi to Calanzana. And what I would say to people is, if you come in the morning, don't try and set off in the middle of the day, because you'll be walking into the heat of the day on the steepest, most prolonged ascent of the entire trip, with absolutely no water whatsoever in the middle of summer. And if it's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong on that first day. What I would say to people is, when you get to Calanzana, if it's the afternoon, that's where you stay for the day. Either book into a hotel if you want luxury, stay down at the Gîte d'Étape, which also does camping, and then wander out and have a meal at one of the bars. Basically unwind after your trip to get there. Actually, the day you leave home, make sure that's the night you stay at Calanzana. Don't try and launch into the GR20 in a big rush in the heat of the day, halfway through the first day, because most people who give up on the GR20 do so on the first day when they realise, they're having to climb something higher than Ben Nevis with absolutely no water and a crippling great pack on the back. It just doesn't do to attack a mountain in that fashion. So I'd say sit down there in Calanzana, enjoy the fact that you're in Corsica, and then the next morning, while it's still cool, get out there before the sun really hits the mountain, get some height in there, and as you climb higher it's cooler anyway, so you're not going to be burnt to a frazzle as you climb. But the thing is, you do have to carry water on that first day, and for most other days you can carry water for the morning, knowing that you can pick up water at the midpoint of the day. So again, if you know where your water's coming from, you budget accordingly. And if you know that there's no water available for a day, you know that you have to carry a full pack of water and you have to ration that water. But in terms of getting away at the end, of course, you've walked 118 miles through the mountains of Corsica, and you turn up a long way from your ferry port or airport. Getting back to the start could mean one entire day of travelling. If you have to get one bus that links with another, you'll probably find there's 4 hours between one service and the other. And if you mistime anything, if you miss the bus, it's going to cost you yet another day. So people have to really, the first thing they should do when they get to Corsica is get hold of the bus and train timetables and study them, because when it comes time to bail out at the far end of the route, you need to get connections that work, that will get you back to your ferry or airport in time for your connection home. If you get that wrong, you're going to lose a whole day. You're going to lose a day just like that. If you then have to flag a taxi down, it will cost an absolute fortune to be taken from one end of the island to the other, and it'll still take several hours anyway. So it's very important. The access is there, but you do have to sort it out. You do have to plan it and think about it in advance. And it's no good just turning up at Conca at the southern end of the route and saying, now, how do we get away? You should already be thinking about that long before you get to that point. Otherwise, it becomes a nightmare even to find the information, let alone find connections that work. To give you an example, if you go from Calvi to Conca by bus, you can do it in about 4.5 hours. If you go from Conca to Calanzana by bus, it's going to take you 10.5 hours. That's the way the connections work. So there's 6 hours difference on the exact same journey. So people need to know about this in advance, and they need to build that into the plans.
Okay, well, luckily for us, your book is very, very comprehensive. There's lots and lots of very practical information in there, and so if you get hold of Paddy's book, which is published by Cicero, there's no way that you won't be taking those things into consideration. Thanks very, very much for that, Paddy. It's fascinating. I know many, many people have got the GR20 down as one of the routes that they really want to try. I guess this is one of those routes that really you'd advise people to have a crack at once before they get into their walking dotage.
I think I certainly would. The thing about the GR20 is you don't meet many 70-year-olds walking it. You can go out on any of the national trails in Britain and find people in their 70s enjoying them, but you don't find many people in their 70s able, with the agility and fitness, to be able to tackle something as rough and tough as the GR20. You don't get many people in their 60s, but you do get a few. It is really the sort of trail that you should be tackling in your peak years. Because after your peak years, the chances of you actually getting the thing successfully completed do diminish. And there does come a point where you just can't put in the sort of effort that's required for that route. More than anything else, it's the effort that's required. It's not the technical difficulty. It's just the fact that when you're climbing very steep, very high mountains in hot weather, it does take it out of you. So, you know, it's not that I'm saying it's a young person's trip. It's just a trip to be done while you're fit and able to do it. Because once your fitness is gone and you're not able for that sort of terrain, then obviously there's no way you can do it. And I always feel, having walked this route a number of times, I always feel it's a shame that somebody maybe wanted to do it but never got round to it. That would almost break my heart, because I'd know what they were missing. So I'd say to people, yes, you know, don't dither about it. If you feel fit and able, if you've got a good head for heights and you can carry your own pack and you don't mind getting hold of the rock, go for it. But if you feel, you know, you really aren't able for it, by all means, pick some other trail. But, you know, it is one that people should think about doing. If they like mountains, if they like backpacking, long distance, through really wild and rugged terrain, I really don't think you could beat the GR20.
Great. Well, there you go. If you've got the GR20 down on your list, get cracking. Don't leave it too long. Paddy, thanks very much for that. You've got a busy year this year, because I think you're updating the GR5 book for Cicerone.
That's right, yeah. The GR5 goes the entire breadth of the Alps from Lac Le Mans near Geneva to Nice on the Mediterranean, and my job is to walk it both ways and check out all alternatives. So I'm going to give it 10 weeks, and that's 10 weeks without a day off. And I'm going to do what I do on the GR20. I'm going to thoroughly enjoy it. I'm going to take the mountains whatever way they come at me and thoroughly enjoy it.
Well, I look forward to speaking to you again when you come back from there. Paddy, once again, thanks very much. I'm sure you've answered a lot of questions that people have who are wondering about the GR20. Good luck in France for the rest of the year, and we'll speak to you when you get back. Great stuff. Thank you very much. Well, that just about wraps up another edition of the Book Club here on the Outdoor Station. I've been talking to Paddy Dillon about the GR20 in Corsica, and most particularly about his guidebook to the trail, which is published by Cicerone and is widely available at around the £14 to £15 mark. I hope to talk to Paddy again later in the year, perhaps when he's back from his excursions on the GR5 route through the Alps. In the meantime, I'm Andy Howell, and until next time, take care and happy hiking.
Thanks to Andy and his guest Paddy Dillon for a great show, more of which will be coming very soon on The Outdoor Station. Bye for now.
This independent programme has been brought to you by The Outdoor Station, the exciting new way to see and hear free information about the outdoors world. If you're a blogger, or if you have a website, you can now incorporate any of these podcasts directly to your site, completely free. Visit our website, theoutdoorstation.co.uk, for more information.